Nice to be back here speaking again. I think I was last here, what, a year ago? Or a year ago. Since a year ago, the world has become increasingly more interesting, if you want to put it that way. I travel on every habitable continent of the world. I've been doing that for over 3 decades. What do I see? My observations tell me that there is a great need for a different kind of culture. What we are grappling with today is a culture that's spread over the world, a culture that knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Human civilization today is very price conscious. The economy is the #1 issue. So much so that, as many of you know, even environmental issues always take a back seat to economic issues. If we're going to change the kind of culture we have today, we indeed have to consider what is value. And as soon as you start making value judgments, then you are dealing with the question of human identity. Now, we can ignore the issue of human identity by focusing on social or political issues, governmental failings of institutions, but we won't get to the bottom of the problem in this way. As long as human beings don't understand their identity, or even consider that that's an important question, then we're not going to be able to affect meaningful change. What the ancient yoga texts of India tell us is that first grapple with identity issues and then everything else follows. But if we ignore identity issues, then we'll be forever like a cat chasing its own tail. We won't be able to get to the root of our problems. If we're going to change the culture of today from price culture to a value culture, then we need wisdom. So what I'm speaking about today is indeed the need for a wisdom culture. A culture that values wisdom about human identity and human purpose above any price knowledge. Because remember, in order to deal with value, you're dealing with value judgments. So what is the nature of the entity that's making value judgments? In order to establish a wisdom culture, we need to understand what is the nature of the creature that is valuing, making value judgments. A great detriment to our attempts to establish a wisdom culture is our tendency to avoid dealing with consciousness. What is consciousness? Why do we have it? It is consciousness that makes value judgments. But as long as we consciously or unconsciously consider consciousness to be like any other, like some kind of matter, whether it's this microphone stand or this cloth as long as we consider consciousness in that way, we'll have a very difficult time understanding what is value and what makes value judgments. We might consider that the human being is a lump of meat, a meat system. And from that meat system, known as the human being, comes special meat known as consciousness. In other words, as long as we consider, without any proof whatsoever, that consciousness is material, it's going to be very difficult for us to enact deep-seated change in society, in ourselves. When we look at Bhagavad Gita, the prime yoga text, not simply in terms of asanas or yoga postures, but in terms of understanding identity and what our identity is connected to. When we look at Bhagavad Gita, we find that the first lesson is about the difference between consciousness and matter. I often point out in my travels that scientific reactions to what is consciousness fall into three camps. The first camp says that consciousness is material, there's no doubt about it, even though there's no proof, and just accept that and move on. The second camp says that we don't know what consciousness is. We may never know. And the third camp says, certainly consciousness is something of it in a different category from material subject matter. What I'd like to present to you is a very provocative concept. Because we have failed to grapple with what is consciousness, we cannot effectively solve so many other problems, whether they are economic, environmental, social, political, unless we know what is it that is allowing us to perceive. What's the medium by which we are aware of economics, politics, the environment? What is it that allows human beings, at least let's understand human beings, what is it that allows human beings to have awareness, to have perceptions, to make value judgments, to have knowledge? Without understanding that, we haven't gotten to the root of our problems. Now you may notice I'm referring to human beings. According to the ancient yoga texts, human beings are not the only creatures that have consciousness, but I don't want to, in this short time period we're allotted, I don't want to take things further afield. At least if we can understand that human beings have consciousness, and we need to understand what that consciousness is and how to nourish consciousness. At least if we can understand that, it can be a great step forward. If I have a car, I understand the car needs oil, it needs petrol. I have consciousness, but what does it need? What nourishes consciousness? So the ancient yoga texts tell us straightly that what nourishes consciousness is not material. The sustenance for enlivening consciousness is not material. So where do we find the non-material enrichment for our consciousness? This is the most important question for human beings. Now you may say that, well, there are people starving in this world. There are people living in poverty. we have to deal with that. Some of you may know the statistics that the amount of persons starving this world are matched by approximately the same amount that have obesity problems. So again, you see that there may not be a shortage of resources in this world. Instead, there may be a problem of consciousness, that some persons, due to low consciousness, are taking more than what they need, and others are not getting what they need. So once again, if we can understand the root of the situation, consciousness, what is it? How is it nourished? We can save ourselves a lot of trouble on the individual level and on the macro level. If the human being mistakes his or her identity as matter, then that human being is going to struggle trying to achieve matter and arrangements of matter for satisfaction. But as soon as you understand that you as a conscious entity are not material, then you won't compete and vie and grapple for matter as a source of satisfaction. So, understanding our true identity as non-material slackens our grip, slackens our acquisitiveness, and reduces the pressure that human beings place on this world, trying to satisfy themselves with something that won't satisfy them. If we are non-material, then we need to seek out non-material sources of satisfaction and nourishment. So in this way, I hope you can understand that the real purpose of the yoga system is not simply physical health. There's nothing wrong with that. The real purpose is how to make the ultimate connection between the individual unit of consciousness and the Supreme Consciousness. In that relationship is packed the nourishment and satisfaction that we need. But as long as we think we are products of matter, we're not going to understand how to nourish ourselves, how to satisfy ourselves. We'll be like running out into the desert looking for water. We can understand that there are laws of nature that have been observed. And these laws of nature describe arrangements in nature and make predictions based on observation. Now, the laws of nature that are accepted widely, how do they affect consciousness? It's only because of consciousness that the set of laws of nature we know about today have been discerned. We're aware of things because of our consciousness. So my point is that if we don't understand consciousness, then we actually don't understand what we're observing. So we've kind of put the cart before the horse. First, let's understand what we are observing, and don't ask childish questions about the nature of the observer. This is going to cause big problems, socially, politically, economically, and even in our understanding of the universe. They're going to be big problems. What are the laws of nature that deal with consciousness? Some founding fathers of quantum mechanics have pointed out that there will probably be a different set of laws of nature that apply to consciousness, because consciousness cannot be described in material terms, and no one knows any laws of nature that deal with consciousness. The ancient yoga texts, such as Bhagavad Gita, describe that in what we know as material existence, consciousness and matter are interacting, although they're different substances. And these different substances both emanate from the same source. So it's not that consciousness, which the yoga texts say indicates a spiritual energy, it's not that consciousness just exists out of nowhere and matter just exists out of nowhere. They both can be traced to a common source. Just like the sun gives off both heat and light. Heat and light can be traced to the sun. Similarly, Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita that matter and consciousness can be traced to the supreme consciousness. So now we're thinking, well, that sounds, yeah, okay, plausible, but how can we actually experience such a reality? Theory is nice, conceptions are nice, but no doubt what's even nicer is direct experience. If there's a higher reality, I want to experience that. Indeed, there is a laboratory for direct experience of the spiritual reality. That is what Krishna speaks about in Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna invites you not for belief, not for theory, but for direct perception of the real self by laboratory experience. But first we have to be induced to enter that laboratory, because we can come up with so many reasons why it's not important. And looking at the way society is structured today, we can understand how someone would come to that conclusion. I've got so many other things to worry about than who I am and what I am. I have school pressures, job pressures. I have the pressures of my daily desires and wants. You may notice that so many people today have a problem distinguishing between wants and needs. And they feel the pressure all the time. What do I really want? What do I really need? Can I get what I really want? And can I get what I really need? And how are the two different? What I want and what I need? And even when they get what they want / need, they're not satisfied. I like to point out how I was speaking at University of Cape Town. Actually, that's where I met your announcer here. And I asked the students, along with the professors gathered there, you all are aware of the new science of happiness and how it's a generally accepted assertion that beyond the basic level of middle class income and acquisitions, any further increase does not lead to an increase in satisfaction and happiness as measured by standard psychological indicators. Well, the audience at that time was about 200 students and professors. So I said, this is the most prestigious institution, University of Cape Town on the African continent. I'm sure you're aware of this. Everyone raised their hands. Yes, yes, we're all aware of it, and generally we accept it. Generally, there's always some pot shots you can take, but we generally accept that beyond the basic middle class standard of income and opulence, any further increase does not lead in an increase in happiness or satisfaction as measured by standard psychological increase. All right, accepted, generally. Then I asked the audience of 200 students and professors, all right, you all know this, you're the top students on the African continent. How many of you are prepared to live on a basic middle class standard of living? Out of 200, maybe 3 raised their hands. So, I'm bringing this example up to show you that there's a gap between theory and what we actually do. So therefore, if we're actually going to cope with what is my identity, we want to get beyond simply theory and have some hands-on laboratory experience. So, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives you the ideas and directs you to the tools for applying those ideas. In chapter 2, it is explained that before we go any further, we have to understand the difference between the body and the self. It's not that the body comes out of nowhere and the self comes out of nowhere, but still they are different. The first step in education is to understand that the body and the self function under different laws. So if you understand the laws that govern matter, that doesn't mean you understand the laws that govern the real self. The fact that we don't understand consciousness should alert us to the fact that something else is going on. Now you may say, well, in the future, consciousness will be understood according to known materialistic vision, paradigm, etc. But you see, from the viewpoint of material science, no one even knows what it is that they're grappling with in terms of consciousness. Where does it come from? Why do we have it? It doesn't show up directly on any scientific instrument in the world. There's no scientific instrument in the world that can directly detect consciousness. Simply, consciousness can be inferred in various ways. So, my point today is that if we are willing to experiment upon ourselves, not blindly, but according to the precise spiritual science methods given in the ancient yoga texts, especially we're speaking of Bhagavad Gita, which is the quintessential yoga text. If we're feeling the motivation to do that, we can profit so much and get real value rather than just knowledge of prices. But in today's society, knowledge of prices is all important. And therefore people don't know how to value. They don't know what is valuable. And it's a great tragedy in terms of the loss of human energy. So much effort, so much hard labor, so much struggling. And where is the satisfaction? As you know, human beings have become the first species to attain the dubious honor of spoiling its own habitat. No other species does that. That shows there's a problem in consciousness. In spite of the gift of developed consciousness that human beings have, they're not using it in the right way. So let's briefly return to discussions about laws of nature. Laws of nature, as known today, are just descriptions of how things in nature are supposed to act. and also predictions that, given these circumstances, such things will continue to happen. But these laws of nature, as given to us today, have nothing in them about causality. Laws of nature don't cause things. They're not agents that make things happen. And they don't bring any power to bear on situations. Laws of nature don't do that. They don't cause, they don't bring the necessary power for things to happen. They're simply descriptive. So if we say that the laws of nature are responsible for everything, this is very childish. And then, not only do we have to describe how laws of nature bring into being matter, we also have to describe how the laws of nature, as presented to us today, bring into being consciousness. In Bhagavad Gita, we find the science of the finite consciousness and the supreme consciousness. In particular, Bhagavad Gita deals with bhakti yoga, described by Krishna as being the top rung on the yoga ladder. The postures, the breathing exercises are for calming your mind so that indeed you can focus on what is the ultimate goal, what is the highest reality. Sometimes, though, and often, people get stuck just with the postures and the breathing. Simply, good health, can't object to good health. But actually, the postures and the breathing are meant to calm us down, chill us out, so we can focus on what is the ultimate reality. And we can't forget that ultimate reality. Otherwise, we'll never understand what the self is. The self is part of the ultimate reality. So bhakti yoga deals with the relationship between the finite self, the tiny particle of spiritual consciousness, and the supreme consciousness. And bhakti yoga presents laws of a different type. Laws that govern the use of consciousness. Some of you may have heard the term karma. It's very popular these days, but karma actually involves laws that apply to consciousness. Just like when dealing with matter, we accept that every action has a reaction. But what about consciousness? What are the reactions to conscious behavior? Western science doesn't understand that because, first of all, Western science has a big problem with consciousness itself. They don't know what it is. They can't directly test for it. And it's very upsetting for our materialistic lifestyles to consider that consciousness is non-material, because then you have to accept a completely different reality along with the ordinary reality that we perceive. So karma refers to laws of nature governing consciousness. As a conscious entity, you have to be held accountable for your actions, and your actions will bring about certain reactions. Briefly, we can explain that the very body that we have is a reaction to conscious actions we've done in the past. What goes around comes around is true not only in terms of matter, but it's also true in terms of our conscious actions. So, if we can understand consciousness, and that means understanding its relationship to the supreme consciousness, then we can actually see a complete picture of our human condition. Of course, once someone becomes sensitive to the real human condition, that means not just the body, but also the consciousness, the non-material particle of spiritual consciousness, known in Sanskrit as the Atma, loosely translated in English as the soul. Once you understand that, you begin to wonder about other living entities. You can see that human beings have more developed consciousness than your pet dog or your pet cat. You begin to wonder about all life forms. But at least first we should understand consciousness in human beings and how to nourish that consciousness. And then we can expand our vision to start taking into account other laws of nature not known by, ordinarily not known. And this way our whole vision opens up and we can see greater possibilities for human development. Greater possibilities for actually getting to the root of human problems. It's like you're driving a car and you never realize the car needs petrol. And so the car stops going and you're wondering, what's going on? What's going on? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are the economic solutions, political solutions, social solutions? Hey, how about putting some petrol in the tank? Similarly, in terms of our own individual crises and the crises of human beings, it seems we're looking everywhere except what actually is the self. And it could be that there's some fear. If we start considering a non-material identity, our whole life can just go topsy-turvy. So finally, I'd like to point out that in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna presents a balanced program for dealing with both our material needs and our non-material needs. It's just that the enlightened person doesn't mistake himself or herself as matter, and therefore doesn't put the emphasis in life on trying to satisfy the self through material acquisition, material achievement, material gratification, and so forth. So in conclusion, if we consider our non-material identity, consciousness lets you know there's a non-material identity for you. Consciousness cannot be understood materially, and that should let us know that our real self cannot be understood materially. We need a different paradigm of science, and we need different laws of nature that will account for the actions and reactions of conscious entities. So this is just a brief introduction to the exciting world of Bhagavad Gita. These are some fundamental lessons given by Krishna in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita. And if we can master the fundamental lessons, then we can indeed proceed to transform ourselves as individuals in the most powerful way, and we can think about transforming society. So, I thank you very much for your kind attention. Maybe there are some questions. Whatever you like. Yes.
I was just wondering from the reading of the Gita, I mean, I'm not, from an Islamic tradition, but I have an interest in it. I have since a while. This notion of karma and dharma. So I was just wondering this sort of, when you spoke of, I hadn't realized, karma is a particular sort of way of studying the consciousness, and I was wondering then how you would perceive the role of dharma, because there is this plot, if you will, to the Gita where Arjuna and him being in a certain position, and then the role of karma and dharma. So I was just wondering, right?
Exactly what you were wondering?
So I was wondering what would be the role of, if karma is consciousness, what would dharma be?
Karma, basically, when you talk about karma, and as I explained, it's quite popular these days. Everyone uses the term. Oh, I banged my toe. Must be my bad karma for yelling at my partner yesterday or something. It's quite a popular way of putting things. But actually, karma refers to laws that are not known or accepted by those who consider that everything is matter. So just like there are laws governing the actions and reactions of matter, similarly, there are laws governing the choices and reactions of those choices by conscious entities. So as long as we keep those laws swept under the rug, or we say they don't even exist, then we're always going to be struggling with great problems, and we can't figure out how those problems came about. So I was describing consciousness and karma in kind of non-sectarian terms. So whether one's from a Hindu background, Islamic background, I'm from a Christian background. So it doesn't, let's get to the root of the situation. So in other words, there's not a Islamic microphone or a Hindu microphone or a Christian microphone. Let's talk about the microphone. Let's talk about the self and identity. And we can take insights from so many spiritual traditions, but eventually we have to walk into the laboratory and get some direct experience.
So would dharma, the sacred duty, how would that fit in with the notion of karma? That was the question.
Dharma means simply, I'll make it brief. Dharma means how to act in a way that is progressive for your elevation as a conscious being. How to do things that don't injure your status, how to do things that improve your status. So Dharma is for those who understand that there's something to them beyond matter, and they should be concerned about the reactions to their conscious choices. Yes?
If somebody asked you whether you believe in God, how would you answer the question?
I'd ask them first, what do they mean by God?
Exactly. Let's just take it literally.
No, you tell me.
Okay, well, I guess there's in my mind, there's probably two ways of looking at it. I guess that's the God from a Judeo-Christian sort of tradition where, as outlined by the Bible, or maybe there's God.
Can you say briefly what that is?
Okay, the Ten Commandments.
Those are the Ten Commandments, though. What about, you mentioned this God word.
Perhaps
I'm not objecting, by the way, I'm just...
No.
Just making things exciting.
Yeah, I guess a God that is described in the Bible as vengeful and, well, I'm not really well read on the Bible, but descriptive. They've used all these descriptive words to describe the character of God and how he'll treat you if you do this and all this sort of stuff.
Okay, as soon as you talk about characteristics, whether vengeful or loving, because, Christians may object if you just cast God in a vengeful way. They say there's also the loving side. So let's look at it this way. As soon as you talk about characteristics and qualities, you're talking about a conscious person. So let's try to understand that conscious person, whether it's the ultimate conscious person or the tiny conscious entities known as us. Let's try to understand the nature of the conscious personality that you may call God. Let's understand the nature of the tiny conscious personalities known as ourselves. That would be a very productive and universal way of proceeding. Okay, you say vengeful, you say loving, you say this, you say that. These are all qualities of consciousness, and that means qualities of a personality. Let's try to understand the nature of a personality that can be the origin of both matter and consciousness. That would be exciting.
So, can you still answer the question?
Which is,
Do you believe in God? And if so, which God is it that you believe in? What is your description of the God of your understanding?
well, it's like, let's say the first time I came to Melbourne, 1993, you could say to me, do you believe there's a mayor? I said, I don't see any mayor. Do you see a mayor? Have you seen the mayor? Have you seen the mayor?
Of course.
You have seen
I
him.
live in this city.
But have you seen him?
Yeah, of course.
Where? In person?
No, I've seen him in the newspaper. I know
In the
he exists.
newspaper, you read about it. Okay.
No, I saw a picture of him.
You saw a picture?
Oh, right.
Photoshop these days, you know?
I'm not sure anybody's got a picture of God yet, so...
Oh, I see.
Have you? Have you seen one?
Take it easy. So, my point is that any intelligent person can see when there's some intelligent arrangement that there's an intelligent conscious entity behind that arrangement. Okay. You might say that, no. As world famous scientists will say, like Stephen Hawking, no. The laws of nature are sufficient to produce everything you see in the universe. Well, what he's cleverly done, mistakenly done, is posited the existence of the universe and then said it creates itself. Because as soon as you talk about laws of nature, you are accepting that something exists. Laws of nature requires a situation to describe, and things have to happen so that the laws of nature can describe them. So it's not an explanation of anything to say that the laws of nature brought it into being. So if you ask me, do I accept that there is a supreme intelligence, a supreme conscious person? I say yes. I don't believe in it. I'd rather actively research the situation and enter a laboratory in which I can verify that existence with spiritual technology.
I'll let you off the hook with that answer.
Think about it. Yes?
My question is how you define the mind or consciousness and the body as separate entities but from the same source. I was curious if you meant that they need to be studied as separate entities or if they are fundamentally different, and how you look at consciousness as in related to the body. So looking at consciousness of the cells, or is it more restricted to the mind?
I am recommending you study the real self as separate from the body, as well as how it interacts with the body. So I'm presenting consciousness as a symptom that you have a non-material identity. That we don't understand. Consciousness should let us know there's something non-material about our identity that we don't understand. So part 2 of your question?
Whether the mind or maybe it's the difference between consciousness and the mind, because I personally see the mind and the body as interrelated, maybe as separate things that are interrelated, and consciousness is something that runs between the whole system, the mind and the body.
All right. So if you look at Bhagavad Gita, you'll find that the expression mind over matter has no meaning, because mind is accepted as matter. Just like there is energy that's grossly apparent, similarly there is energy that's subtly apparent. So psychic powers, the mind, this is accepted in the yoga texts as subtle material energy. So you may become very expert in psychic powers, mental powers, but this is still materialism. It's just known as subtle materialism. consciousness is something else. All right?
Okay.
I think yes, a lot to think about. As long as we're dealing with the movements of the mind, we still haven't understood consciousness. Now, it's a good question you've asked. How to distinguish between consciousness and the mind? That requires some laboratory techniques because it can be confusing. Let me put it this way. The consciousness is acting not only through the body, but it's also acting through a subtle body known as the mind. Sometimes people have out-of-body experiences. A survey was done in the UK in which 25% of university students admitted that they've had an out-of-body experience. I mean, Melbourne University is different, of course, but 25% of students said it's happened. We don't know what it is. They have experience of just drifting outside their body. So the yoga texts explain that what's happening is that the subtle body, or the astral body, is temporarily drifting outside the gross physical body. But you're neither the gross physical body or the subtle astral body. You're the unit of spiritual consciousness that is wearing both the gross body and the subtle body. This is what Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, something to think about. Yes?
What do you think is the purpose of the brain? Consciousness is not physical.
Okay. I'll give you some more facts from the UK. Published in the journal Science, which is a top-rated scientific journal, there was someone at the uni in, which was Sheffield, yes. And he went to the doctor. And the doctor noticed that the person had an abnormally large head. So the doctor wanted to do some scans. And the doctor was astonished to find out, this is all documented. I spoke this a few years ago at RMIT, and one professor came up to me and demanded, I want to see the evidence for this, because it's really, it shakes you up. So he followed me all the way back to where I was staying in Melbourne to see the, the evidence. So this person turned out to have 98.5% of his gray matter missing, and there was just water there. Yet, he was an honor student in mathematics. It's scientifically documented. The ancient yoga texts explain that the brain is a mechanism through which consciousness acts, but it's not 100% absolutely necessary that consciousness needs a physical brain to act. That's really scary. There are also other cases of persons with brain matter missing, to the extent you'd say they have no brain. But the one with the honor student in mathematics, that's the most striking example, so I quote that one. There are others, though. Yes?
You said that we have problems understanding our own consciousness and that we should go about understanding that it's a non-material thing, and that there's techniques to do that. What would you suggest to do?
In this short discussion, obviously I can't go into a lengthy presentation, unfortunately, but a prime technique is sound vibration. At the beginning of the program, you had a presentation of mantra sound vibration. The Sanskrit word mantra literally exactly means a sound that can deliver your mind from illusion. Now, of course, the word mantra is another popular word. It can mean anything. So, our consciousness is affected by sound vibration. The right sound can free our mind from illusion and bring about a reconnection with the Supreme Consciousness. So we advocate the Hare Krishna mantra because it's recommended in the yoga text as the prime method for cleansing the consciousness so that we can actually understand what our identity is and what is the supreme identity. How's that for a nutshell presentation?
Thank you.
Yes.
You just said that there are two types of thing. That is, one is material and another one is non-material. The consciousness.
Two kinds of what, I'm sorry?
Consciousness. There are two kinds of consciousness. That is one material and another one is non-material. And you termed soul as non-material consciousness.
I don't know that I said that. I presented consciousness as the indicator of our non-material identity.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. My point is, what happens to the soul as a non-material identity after our death?
Bhagavad Gita deals so brilliantly with those points that according to your consciousness, your state of mind, at the time of death, you get another body. Yes, let me finish. Slow down now. This present body and its reactions is based upon your conscious actions in your previous life. So, at the time of death, your consciousness then is like a template upon which your next physical body is based. In that way, you could say belief becomes biology. Now, if I had time, I would explain to you about all the scientific reincarnation studies done and the volumes of evidence. Evidence so persuasive that when the most conservative scientific and medical organization in the USA, the AMA, American Medical Association, when they looked at the evidence, they said, there's nothing we can say about this. In other words, in terms of research, it's impeccable, but we can't say anything about the conclusion.
But according to Harvard University, there is a new theory, death theory. They said death and adjustment theory. And they just want to capture the soul after just some dying patient. They put some very high sensitive camera. They will just detect the electro and magnetic field that is not visible with human eyes. And they are just trying to see some illuminating things through this electromagnetic field. But it's not established one, but they are also working on the soul movement from body to somewhere else.
Krishna can probably save them a lot of research money in Bhagavad Gita, but Krishna explains you can't detect that with ordinary means. It's not possible. You're dealing with a different kind of energy. And you need you need different types of laboratory techniques for dealing with that different energy. So, but try to think in that way, just as a hypothesis, that maybe we're dealing with a completely different type of energy that requires a completely different type of technique and technology, and maybe we're getting into a lot of unnecessary complexity with human civilization because we're neglecting that different type of lifestyle required to verify our spiritual identity. We'll leave it at that. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, you had it. Anyone else? Yes.
Could you just explain one more time,
Yes.
sort of as a thought process, the root of your belief that consciousness is non-material or is not a product of material things?
Okay, just to be provocative, let me flip that over. Can you explain, I'm not saying you believe this, can you explain your belief that consciousness is simply an epiphenomenon, it's just something produced by the brain?
Well, I don't believe that.
Okay, thank you. That's why I asked you. Okay, so you understand that any statement that consciousness is just some emanation from the brain, that is a metaphysical statement outside the realm of science as we know it. Okay. It's basically a religious belief. A religious belief in matter being able to do anything and everything. Now you want me to explain how consciousness is non-material.
Why do you believe that?
Belief bores me, to tell you the truth. There's so many beliefs one can have sitting on their head, but what we need is an actual laboratory experience of how you're not the body. Once you have a definitive experience of how you're not the body, you'll change your whole life. You won't pursue matter anymore or material arrangements as a source of satisfaction. So I recommend entering the laboratory according to Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita. Belief, for me, doesn't motivate me.
But do you think it's possible that consciousness could be some kind of product of material things? Because many people, postulate that.
They can't prove it though. There's no proof whatsoever. It's as I say, it's a religious belief. They should recognize that. And don't call it science. There are many scientists who will say that we have no proof whatsoever. Let's be honest, we don't know what it is. But that doesn't get you research money,
No, that's true. But do you reject that possibility yourself, or do you accept it as a
Of course. You ask me point blank, I completely reject it based not on belief, but on experience. And if you want to become more acquainted with the subject matter, we have so many wonderful and interesting informations for you to peruse. Okay. Thank you. Well, this has been probably the most stimulating audience I've had in my global travels in about 5 years. Exciting. I'd be happy to stay here forever, but what else do we have on the program?
Lunch.
Lunch? Oh, excuse me. That's what they're all waiting for. All right. I'll get out of your way for lunch, and I thank you very much for your wonderful participation. Thank you.